Good evening and welcome to the Sleep to Lore series. Tonight we will talk about Dr. Sleep, observing the life of Dan Torrance decades after the horrors of the Overlook Hotel, as he faces a cult known as the True Knot across the highways of America. If you would like to support our journey into the darkness, please subscribe or leave a comment. Before we begin, I have a question for you. Have you ever experienced a moment of strong intuition or a gut feeling that turned out to be completely right? Please let me know your story in the comments below. Now let us quiet our minds and follow the steam into the night. 1. We begin in the shadow of destruction, where fire acts as a cleansing agent that never quite scrubs the stain away. The Overlook Hotel, a monolithic vessel of malevolence, burned to the ground in the Colorado mountains. The official reports cited a defective boiler, a mundane mechanical failure to explain a supernatural catastrophe. But we know the truth. It wasn't just steam pressure that blew the roof off. It was a pressure cooker of alcoholism, domestic violence, and accumulated spiritual rot. The survivors were few. Wendy Torrance, battered and broken. Dick Halloran, the psychic chef with a heart as vast as the Continental Divide. And young Danny Torrance, the boy with the shine. They survived the fire, but trauma is a patient ghost. It follows you home. Wendy and Danny drifted to Florida, seeking warmth to counteract the bone-deep chill of the Overlook. But injuries of the spine and spirit do not heal simply because the scenery changes. Wendy was physically shattered, her body a map of pain that would plague her for the rest of her life. They were refugees of the paranormal, living on settlement money that felt like hush money, trying to pretend the world was rational. But for Danny, the veil between worlds remained dangerously thin. In 1981, the horror came knocking on a bathroom door in Tampa. It is a primal fear, the violation of the sanctuary that is one's home. Danny, possessed of that terrible intuition, knew who waited behind the door before he even opened it. It wasn't his mother. It was the woman from room 217. Mrs. Massey, a bloated aquatic corpse, a suicide who refused to stay dead. She sat upon the toilet, a mockery of domesticity, grinning with decayed lips. This is the psychological horror of the haunting. It targets the child where he feels safest. The spectre wasn't just a visual scare. She was a sensory assault. The smell of wet decay, the sight of pallid, dripping flesh. She was a memory that had clawed its way out of the past to choke the future. Danny, paralyzed by the return of his tormentor, did the only thing a child could do. He retreated into silence. He stopped speaking because words were insufficient to describe the rot invading his life. He reverted to thumb-sucking, a regression that signals a mind under siege. Wendy, terrified by her son's silence and the physical evidence of the ghost, necrotic fluid left on the toilet seat, called for the only reinforcement she had. She called Dick Halloran. 2. Dick Halloran arrived like a warrior monk in a red Cadillac, bearing the scars of the Overlook, but also the wisdom of a survivor. He understood that Danny's silence wasn't stubbornness, it was a barricade. He took the boy to the beach, away from the claustrophobia of the apartment, to teach him the most vital lesson of his life. This is where the narrative shifts from a ghost story to a lesson in psychic self-defense. Dick explained the nature of their gift, the shining. It is a beacon, a lighthouse in the dark that attracts moths. But some moths are wolves. The spirits of the Overlook, like Mrs. Massey, were not merely ghosts. They were parasites. They fed on the energy Danny emitted. If he feared them, he fed them. If he acknowledged them, he gave them substance. To save the boy, Dick had to share his own trauma. He recounted the story of his black grandpa, Andy Halloran. This narrative detour serves a crucial thematic purpose. It illustrates that abuse is the true monster. Dick's grandfather wasn't a ghost. He was a sadistic pedophile who used fear and pain to control his victim. He tortured young Dick, both physically and psychologically, threatening him with a fictional boogeyman named Charlie Manx to ensure silence. The parallel is stark. Danny was hunted by dead ghosts. Dick had been hunted by a living one. But the mechanism of survival is the same. Dick revealed that even after his grandfather died, the man's spirit returned to torment him, a hungry shade seeking one last taste of fear. Dick survived by learning to lock the trauma away. He taught Danny the concept of the lockbox. It is a profound psychological metaphor. We all have lockboxes. We compartmentalize grief, shame, and terror to function. Dick made this literal. He gave Danny a physical lockbox to practice with, instructing him to build a duplicate in his mind. A mental vault. Steel walls, heavy tumblers, unbreakable resolve. It was a weaponization of the mind. The lesson was clear. You cannot kill what is already dead, but you can imprison it. You can deny it the oxygen of your attention. 3. The test of the lockbox came swiftly. Mrs. Massey returned, this time in the bathtub, the site of her original suicide. But the dynamic had shifted. Danny was no longer prey. He was the warden. He entered the bathroom not with a scream, but with a mental construct ready. When the rotting woman beckoned him, expecting fear, Danny gave her nothing. He shoved her screaming essence into the mental lockbox and slammed the door. This act of psychic imprisonment is a triumph of will, but it carries a heavy implication. Danny didn't exorcise the demons, he swallowed them. He stored the horror inside his own head. Horace Derwent, the masked partygoer from the Overlook, appeared later at Danny's school whispering madness. He too went into a box. The Overlook's owner, into a box. Danny Torrance became a walking jailhouse for the damned. He believed he was safe. He believed he had won. But the narrative offers a grim foreshadowing here. We are told that Danny vowed never to drink, having seen what alcohol did to his father. But genetics and trauma are powerful architects of destiny. The lockboxes held the ghosts, but they could not hold back the hereditary curse of addiction. The tragedy of Danny Torrance is that in locking away his monsters, he isolated himself, setting the stage for a different kind of haunting, one found in the bottom of a bottle. 4. The narrative lens widens now, shifting away from the Torrance lineage to a different breed of predator. We meet Andrea Steiner, a young woman with a snake tattoo and a burning hatred for men. Her hatred is not unfounded. It is the callus on a wound inflicted by years of incestuous abuse by her father. Andy is a survivor who turned feral. She possesses a sliver of the shine, though she calls it a push, the ability to mentally dominate others with suggestion. We see her in a movie theater, seducing an older businessman only to drug him with her mind and mutilate his face. It is a scene of cold vengeance. Andy is not a hero. She's a victim who has learned to bite back with venom. But as she enacts her petty revenge, she is being watched. Enter the true knot. They appear to be a caravan of geriatric tourists, wandering America in Winnebagos and RVs, harmless and invisible. This is their camouflage. In reality, they are ancient, psychic vampires. They are led by Rose the Hat, a creature of breathtaking beauty and terrifying presence. The knot does not feed on blood, they feed on steam, the essence released when a child with the shining dies in pain. The contrast is chilling. Danny Torrance shines and attracts ghosts. The true knot hunts those who shine to consume them. They are the apex predators of the supernatural world. Rose kidnaps Andy, not to eat her, but to recruit her. She sees potential in the snake. The recruitment pitch is a seduction of immortality. Live forever, stay young, be free of pain. All it costs is your humanity. 5. The ritual of Andy's induction, the turning, is a piece of body horror that rivals the Overlook's worst nightmares. In a nondescript campground, surrounded by the mundane clutter of lawn chairs and coolers, the true knot reveals their true nature. They are a hive mind, bound together by the consumption of agony. To become one of them, Andy must take steam. She must inhale the essence of a murdered child. The description of this process is visceral. It is a violation of the soul. As Andy inhales the mist from Rose's canister, her physical body agonizingly cycles out of existence, turning to glass, to bone, to nothingness, before reforming. It is a death and rebirth. The pain is the price of admission. Andy Steiner dies, and the snake is born. She accepts the bargain. She trades her trauma for power, her mortality for the endless highway. The psychological insight here is terrifying. The abused child has become the abuser. She has joined a family that survives by inflicting the very pain she once suffered. The cycle of abuse is not just a human failing. Here, it is elevated to a supernatural ecosystem. The true knot endures because they have discarded empathy for hunger. 6. We jump forward in time, and the tone drops from supernatural horror to the gritty, nauseating reality of rock bottom. Danny is no longer a child. He is Dan Torrance, a man in his 30s, and he has failed. The lockboxes held the ghosts, but the alcohol let them out in different ways. He is a drifter, a brawler, a drunk. He is his father's son. We find him waking up in a squalid apartment in Wilmington, North Carolina, beside a woman named Deanie. The description of the hangover is tactile. The throbbing head, the sour stomach, the shame that tastes like copper. This is the unglamorous reality of addiction. There are no ghosts here, only the wreckage of bad decisions. But the shining has not left him. It has mutated. In the bathroom, Dan hallucinates, or perhaps sees truly, death flies crawling on the face of a drug dealer. It is an omen of impending mortality. He knows death is coming, yet he is too numb to care. The true horror of this chapter is not supernatural. It is the toddler, Tommy. Dan wakes to find Deanie's neglected son wandering the apartment in a sodden diaper, reaching for a bag of cocaine on the table, calling it candy. The innocence of the child clashes violently with the sordidness of the environment. Dan sees bruises on the boy's arm, the fingerprints of abuse. Here, the narrative twists the knife. Dan Torrance, the boy who was saved by Dick Halloran, the boy who survived the Overlook, has a choice. He could help. He could call the authorities. He could be the protector. Instead, he chooses the bottle. 7. The depth of Dan's fall is measured in $70. That is the amount he steals from the single mother's purse before he leaves. He rationalizes it, as all addicts do. He tells himself he needs it to survive, that she would just blow it on drugs. He leaves the child in that dangerous room, surrounded by negligence and cocaine. He walks out into the blinding sun of Wilmington, a thief and a coward. He buys a bottle of cheap whiskey and retreats to a homeless encampment under a bridge. As he drinks himself into oblivion, the shining pierces through the alcohol. It brings him the image of Tommy, the blue eyes, the reaching hand, the word canny. This memory becomes a new ghost, more powerful than Mrs. Massey or Horace Derwent because it is born of moral failure. The ghosts of the Overlook were external monsters inflicted upon him. Tommy is a monster of Dan's own making. He abandoned a child to the wolves. As Dan drifts into a drunken stupor, we see the tragedy of the sleep-to-law concept fully realized. He isn't sleeping to dream. He is sleeping to forget. He flees north, running from the memory of the baby, running from his father's legacy, running from himself. He eventually finds work in hospices, using his shine to comfort the dying, earning the nickname Dr. Sleep. But the redemption is fragile. The lockboxes in his mind are rusting. The trauma is leaking out. And somewhere in the darkness of America, the true knot is hungry, and they are looking for steam. The stage is set for a collision between the man who hides from his power and the monsters who feed on it. Chapter 1. The road is a long grey ribbon that never really ends, not for a man running from ghosts. We find Dan Torrance drifting, a piece of human flotsam caught in the currents of America's backroads. The daily drowning, the blackout drinking, had paused after Wilmington, but the thirst hadn't. That terrible scratching thirst that lives in the back of the throat and the bottom of the soul. He'd go a week, maybe two, dry as a bone and miserable, until the world grew too sharp to bear. It could be anything that set him off. A beer commercial full of smiling, sun-kissed liars, a song on the radio, or just the crushing weight of his own history. When he fell off the wagon, he didn't just slip, he dove. And when he woke up, usually in a stranger's bed or a gutter, the memories would be waiting. He thought of Deanie. He thought of the little boy in the baseball shirt. He thought of the $70 he stole from a woman who had nothing, and the cocaine he left behind. The guilt was a physical thing, a parasite eating him from the inside out. He drifted from New York to Massachusetts, working jobs he was overqualified for, and leaving them before anyone noticed the tremor in his hands or the smell on his breath. He was a functional ruin. But there was something else too. The shining. It hadn't left him when the Overlook Hotel burned to ash all those years ago. It was dimmed by the alcohol, suffocated by the booze, but it was still there. Sometimes he'd catch a scent, brimstone and rot, and know that the true knot was nearby, traveling the highways in their innocuous RVs, hunting for the special steam that people like Dan possessed. He didn't know them by name yet, but his shine knew them. It recognized the predators. Dan found himself on a bus to New Hampshire, hugging a paper bag containing his best friend and worst enemy. He sat in the drunk seat, back by the toilet, the place where broken men go to hide. And there, in the rattle and hum of the diesel engine, a voice broke through. Not the voice of his mother or his father, but something clearer. You don't have to live this way. It was a thought so alien, so hopeful, that he almost looked around to see who had spoken. It was the first crack in the armor of his self-destruction. He threw the bottle away at a rest stop, a small victory, but a victory nonetheless, and stepped into the town of Frasier. Frasier was a postcard town, trying desperately to find a reason to exist between ski season and leaf-peeping season. But what caught Dan's eye wasn't the mountains, it was the miniature. Teeny town. A scale model of the main street complete with a tiny train called the Helen Rivington. It was charming, uncanny and strange, and standing there, looking at a miniature turret, Dan saw a ghost. Tony, the imaginary friend, or rather the projection of his future self, from his childhood. Tony waved from a boarded-up window of the local hospice. It was a hallucination, a glitch in the matrix of his mind, but it felt like a greeting. He met Billy Freeman by the miniature train. Billy was a local fixture, a man with a rough face and a good heart, and immediately Dan felt that familiar prickle. Billy had a touch of the shine. Not a floodlight like Dan, but a little flashlight, enough to have hunches that were always right. They connected instantly, two men speaking a language beneath the spoken words. Billy knew Dan was trouble, but he also knew Dan was necessary. He sensed the utility in him. With Billy's intuition paving the way, Dan found himself in the office of Casey Kingsley, the town's municipal boss. Kingsley was a man carved from granite and hard experience, surrounded by disco music bleeding down from the aerobics class upstairs. He was death on drinking, a man who had walked through that fire himself, and he warned Dan in no uncertain terms. If you drink, you're gone. Dan lied, of course. He promised sobriety with the easy fluency of a practicing alcoholic. He got the job. He got a room in a boarding house. He was trying to plant roots in shallow soil. But the Overlook doesn't let go easily. That night the wind howled down from the White Mountains, sounding like the screams of the damned. In the darkness of his rented room, the sobriety let the barriers down, and the horror crept in. He woke up, or thought he woke up, to find Deanie in the room. Deanie, the woman from his past, dead and bloated from an overdose, sitting in the corner. She warned him about a woman in a hat, a warning about the true knot, though he didn't understand it yet. The Shining was trying to protect him, but it was using the language of his nightmares. The terror escalated. He woke again, a double dream, to find Deanie's son, Tommy, in the bed beside him. The boy he had abandoned. The boy was broken, his skull caved in. A victim of the violence Dan had fled. The guilt was a monster with teeth. Dan scrambled away, the line between reality and psychosis blurring. He needed a drink. He needed to shut the door. The mind is a blackboard, and alcohol is the eraser. The next morning, the hallucinations bled into the daylight. He saw a top hat tumbling down the street, a psychic echo of Rose the Hat, the leader of the true knot. He saw blood on the bathroom mirror. Redrum. The word that had haunted his childhood, the backward signature of murder. It was stamped on his reality. The pressure was unbearable. The sobriety that had seemed like a lifeline now felt like a cage with invisible monsters. Dan broke. He went to the store and bought the wine. Thunderbird. The bottom shelf Oblivion. He took it to the town common, sitting on a bench in the cold morning light, staring at the bottle like it was a holy relic and a loaded gun. He twisted the cap. Off, on, off, on. The struggle wasn't just about the drink, it was about the surrender. If he drank, the Overlook won. If he drank, his father's legacy won. Billy Freeman found him there. He didn't judge, he just intervened. And then Casey Kingsley stepped in, not with anger, but with the brutal truth of one survivor to another. Are you sick and tired of being sick and tired? That question is the pivot point of a life. It's the moment where the freefall stops and the climb begins. Dan Torrance, the boy who survived the snow, finally surrendered, not to the bottle, but to the help. Chapter 2. We shift now across the map and across the spectrum of life, from the darkness of a broken man to the blinding light of a new arrival. In a delivery room, a baby is born, Abra Stone. But this is not an ordinary birth. Her great-grandmother, Conchetta, a woman steeped in the old ways and the superstitions of the old country, watches the video of the birth and sees something the doctors missed. The baby was born with a caul, a membrane over the face. In the folklore of the superstitious, this is the mark of the second sight. Il amnio. Conchetta knows. She feels the hum of power radiating from this infant. While the parents, Lucy and David, worry about normal things, Conchetta understands that something ancient has entered the world. Abra isn't just a child. She is a lighthouse. Meanwhile, Dan is counting days. He's in the basement of a church, sitting in the front row of an AA meeting because the back row is for those planning their escape. He has a sponsor, he has a notebook, and he has the raw, exposed nerves of early sobriety. He is learning to live without the anesthesia. And in that raw state, his mind becomes a receiver. During a meeting, his pen moves across the paper of his notebook, not guided by his conscious mind, but by that radio signal in his head. He writes a name he doesn't know. Abra. It's a tether. A connection forged in the ether between the recovering alcoholic in New Hampshire and the infant prodigy in the suburbs. He doesn't know who she is, but he knows she matters. He paints the letters, shading them in, anchoring the psychic link. But every light casts a shadow, and in the dark corners of America, the shadows are hungry. Enter the true knot. They look like retirees, the harmless elderly wandering the highways in their Winnebagos and campers. They wear polyester and sun visors. They look like they spend their days playing bridge and complaining about the weather. But they are ancient. They are not human. They are psychic vampires who feed on steam, the essence released when people with the shining die in pain and terror. They are led by Rose the Hat, a creature of immense beauty and terrible malice. They have been wintering in the desert, but now they are moving, drifting, hunting. They are the apex predators of the supernatural world, and they are always hungry. They are a dark mirror to Dan's journey, wanderers who feed on death rather than running from it. Then comes the day the world broke, September 11th, 2001. The connection between Dan, Abra, and the knot tightens around this tragedy. In the days leading up to it, the psychic pressure builds. Lucy and David, Abra's parents, suffer shared nightmares. They dream of their daughter weeping, marked with numbers, 11, 175. The flight numbers. The universe is screaming a warning, and it's funneling through the baby. On the morning of the attacks, Abra is inconsolable. She screams with a hysterical, terrifying intensity that defies all medical explanation. Her parents rush her to the hospital, terrified she is dying, but the doctors find nothing. She is a siren channeling the coming agony of thousands. It is a scene of domestic terror set against the backdrop of looming national catastrophe. The baby screams and screams, a raw conduit for the collective trauma about to be unleashed. And then, the moment the first plane hits, she stops. Silence. The event has happened. The steam has been released. And where are the true knot? They are in New Jersey, standing on the waterfront, watching the smoke rise from the ruins of the Twin Towers. But they are not grieving. They are feeding. To them, the tragedy is a buffet. The immense suffering, the sudden, violent death of so many, releases a cloud of steam so thick It is almost visible to them. They breathe it in, rejuvenating their ancient bodies, glutting themselves on the misery of a nation. It is a chilling, grotesque image, these seemingly sweet old people inhaling the ashes of devastation with ecstasy. This is the landscape of our story. On one side, a man clawing his way out of hell, trying to keep his demons in check. On the other, a child blazing with a power she cannot control. And circling them both, the ancient travelers who eat light. The board is set, the players are moving, and the shine is the thread that binds them all together in a web of destiny and danger. Chapter 3. The narrative now shifts, bridging the gap between a recovering alcoholic rebuilding his life and a toddler whose life is becoming increasingly terrifyingly extraordinary. We find Dan Torrance in January of 2004. He's found a rhythm, a fragile stasis between the man he was and the man he wants to be. He's working at the Helen Rivington House, a hospice, and he's driving again. A simple act, but for a man who spent years in a haze of booze and bus tickets, the freedom of a 3-year-old caprice feels like a chariot of fire. There is a psychological comfort in routine for the recovering addict. Dan finds his sanctuary in the Thursday night AA meetings in North Conway. These aren't the large, platitude-filled gatherings where people hide behind slogans. This is a small, intimate enclave, the We Study Sobriety group. It's here, in the safety of the Ambets Hall, that Dan witnesses the raw, bleeding honesty of recovery. It's a place where the secrets that usually fester in the dark are dragged into the light. During one of these sessions, a regular named Dr. John, or DJ to the group, confesses a lapse in honesty. He's lost an expensive watch, a gift from his wife, and has been lying about it. It's a mundane problem, but for an alcoholic, the guilt of a small lie can be the crack in the dam that lets the floodwaters back in. Here, we see the shining re-emerge, not as the terrifying ghosts of the Overlook, but as a quiet, intuitive nudge. Dan doesn't want to be a parlor trickster. He fears the reputation of a freak, but his empathy for John overrides his caution. In a moment that mirrors his childhood ability to find lost objects for his parents, Dan sees the truth. He pulls John into a hug, the classic AA embrace, and the vision snaps into place. He sees a specific bathroom at Elliott Hospital, a shelf with dark red disinfectant, and the watch abandoned there while John washed his hands, consumed by anxiety over a terminally ill child. It's a pivotal moment for Dan. He risks exposure to help a friend. When the watch is found exactly where Dan predicted, he deflects the supernatural reality, attributing it to a lucky guess. But the bond is sealed. Dan advises John to pay it forward through the 12th step. It's a transaction of grace. However, the narrative pendulum swings back to the Stone family, where grace looks a lot more like a haunting. We move forward to shortly before Abra's 3rd birthday. Her parents, David and Lucy, along with her great-grandmother Conchetta, Momo, are sitting in Dr. John's office. They are terrified. They are there to confess the unexplainable, treating John not just as a pediatrician, but as a confessor. David recounts a timeline of psychic phenomena that is deeply unsettling. It begins with 9/11. As a baby, Abra fell into a marathon crying jag that ceased only when the towers fell, a precognitive resonance with a national trauma. Then came the phantom piano. The parents describe hearing a specific Beatles track, not a second time, playing from the downstairs piano in the dead of night. Not clumsily, but perfectly. When they investigated, the piano cover was down, but the music lingered in the air, a spectral concert performed by a sleeping infant's mind. The list of anomalies grows. Abra finding hidden money. Abra sensing when Momo is at the door. But the most visceral incident involves the neighbor, Mrs. Judkins. Abra, playing with blocks, suddenly screams that Wani is hurt and bleeding. When the women rush across the street, they find the neighbor on the floor with a fractured skull, a halo of blood around her head. A toddler saved her life through remote viewing. The psychological strain on the parents is palpable. They are describing a wind blowing through their house, a power they cannot see but constantly feel. They are living in a home where the laws of physics are subject to their daughter's whims. They aren't scared of her. They are scared for her. What happens when a child with the power to trip circuit breakers and levitate objects throws a teenage tantrum? While the Stones grapple with their daughter's growing power, Dan settles into the turret room of the Rivington house. It's a symbolic ascension. He is taking his place as the guardian of the dying. He cleans out the junk, installs a heater, and sets up a blackboard to track patients. It is a monastic existence, shared with a hospice cat named Azzy, who Dan insists is the real doctor. But the connection between the two shiners is tightening. On the morning of Abra's 3rd birthday, Dan wakes to find his blackboard erased. In place of the patient names, a single word is scrawled in chalk: hell. It's ambiguous. Is it hell? Is it a truncated hello? Dan tries to sense the author, asking aloud if it's Abra. He gets a fleeting psychic impression. Daddy says we'll have balloons before the connection fades. It's a chilling reminder that these two powerful minds are linked across the ether, like radios tuned to the same forbidden frequency. The climax of the chapter arrives at Abra's birthday party. It is a scene of idyllic suburban normality, Lil Chums, daycare kids, yellow balloons, and a peaceable kingdom vibe. It's the kind of setting Stephen King loves to disrupt. The entertainment is a magician named the Great Mysterio. He's good, capturing the children's attention with water-squirting flowers and disappearing rabbits. The turning point is the spoon trick. Mysterio hangs spoons from his face, delighting Abra. She laughs, clapping, announcing that she can do that too. Abba can do spoons. The magician leaves. The party moves on, but physics in the Stone household is about to shatter. A massive jangling crash comes from the kitchen. When the adults rush in, they find a scene of domestic poltergeist activity that defies explanation. The silverware drawer has exploded, but the spoons, every single one of them, are hanging from the ceiling. They dangle from the light fixtures and the exhaust hood, held by a magnetic force generated by a 3-year-old's desire to imitate a magic trick. Abra stands there, terrified by her own strength, asking if she's in trouble. As her mother comforts her, the concentration breaks, and the spoons rain down with a deafening clatter. It is a manifestation of raw, uncontrolled telekinesis. In the aftermath, Dr. John tries to rationalize the impossible. He consults a nephew to research similar cases, finding a few hundred documented instances over decades. He tries to offer a prognosis. It will peak in adolescence and then fade. He advises the parents to love her, treat her as normal, and above all, keep their mouths shut. He compares it to a rare condition, trying to medicalize the supernatural to make it manageable. But as the chapter closes, there is a heavy sense of irony in John's comforting words. He assures them they will get through this, that the power will subside. But we, the audience, know better. We know that Dan Torrance's blackboard didn't say hell by accident. We know that a power this bright doesn't just fade away, it attracts attention. And in the world of the true knot, Attention is a death sentence. The board is set, the pieces are moving, and the spoons on the ceiling are just the beginning. Chapter 4. We open in the dead of winter, January 2007. The setting is Rivington House, a hospice facility where Dan Torrance has finally found a semblance of peace, though the past refuses to stay buried. Outside, a nor'easter is burying the town of Fraser under snow, but the real storm is inside Dan's head. Even years later, the Overlook Hotel haunts him. He dreams he's a child again, wandering those cursed hallways, staring at a fire hose that looks like a snake. It's a manifestation of his trauma, the inanimate becoming animate, the harmless becoming deadly. In the dream, the hose whispers to him, taunting him before transforming into a viper. It's a psychological callback to the events of The Shining, reminding us that for Dan, the line between reality and the supernatural is permanently fractured. He wakes up not to the hotel, but to his new reality, a life of sobriety and service. The intercom buzzes. It's the night shift. There's a cat named Azzy at the facility, a house cat, who serves as a furry grim reaper. King uses Azzy as a supernatural barometer. The cat knows when death is imminent. He doesn't comfort the living, he curls up with the dying. Tonight, Azzy has chosen Charlie Hayes. This confirms Dan's role here. He isn't just an orderly, he is a transition specialist. Dan heads downstairs, navigating the social hierarchy of the hospice. He runs into Fred Carling, a night shift orderly who represents the banal, casual cruelty of the world. The kind of guy who eats snacks while people die. Carling is a stark contrast to Dan. Where Dan feels everything, Carling feels nothing. Dan notices Carling has left bruises on the dying man's arm, a detail that ignites a spark of the old Torrance rage. It's crucial to note that Dan's sobriety hasn't cured his anger. It's only put a lid on it. That Jack Torrance temper is still there, waiting for an excuse to break someone's jaw. In the patient's room, we see the titular Dr. Sleep in action. Charlie Hayes is terrified of the void, the nothingness he believes awaits him. Dan, however, knows better. He uses the Shining not as a weapon or a curse, but as a palliative tool. He takes the dying man's hand and acts as a psychic anchor. He sees Charlie's memories, the tractor, the wife, the life lived, and helps Charlie transition. This is the redemption arc of Dan Torrance. The power that once attracted monsters is now being used to ferry souls peacefully into the afterlife. He literally puts the man to sleep, witnessing the gasp, the red mist of life leaving the body. But then the supernatural frequency shifts. Azzy the cat sees something in the doorway. Dan feels it too, not a ghost, but a presence, a little girl. He asks if it's Abra. He hears phantom piano notes. This is the first psychic handshake between Dan and Abra Stone, a connection that transcends distance. She is the beacon, and he is the receiver. Even after the connection fades, the impact remains. The chapter closes with a flash of violence. Dan confronts Carling about the bruises on the dead man. It's a tense standoff. Dan threatens to ruin Carling, and for a moment we see the dangerous man Dan could be if he let go. He physically dominates the larger man, channeling that dark, hereditary aggression. But he pulls back. He returns to his room, still shaking, and in the quiet, he feels Abra's hand in his again. A psychic comfort that allows him to sleep. Meanwhile, 20 miles away, a 10-year-old Abra Stone clutches her stuffed rabbit, aware that she just touched the man from her dreams. The bond is sealed. Chapter 5. Here the narrative widens to introduce the antagonists, and King gives us a masterclass in modern camouflage. We meet the true Knot. To the average observer, they are the RV people, the harmless retirees in polyester pants and sun visors, driving slow-moving Winnebagos down American highways. They seem banal, blending into the background of rest stops and campgrounds. But this is a facade. The true Knot are psychic vampires, ancient wanderers who feed on steam, the essence released when people who possess the shining die in pain. The lore here is fascinatingly parasitic. They don't age like us provided they keep feeding. They cycle through rejuvenations, turning from elderly to youthful and back again. But they have a weakness. They are starving. The modern world is running low on steam, or perhaps the quality is degrading. We jump to May 2011. Rose the Hat, the beautiful and ruthless leader of the Knot, is in her Earth cruiser. She's discussing a death in the family with her second-in-command, Crow Daddy. Tommy the truck has died, not from violence but essentially from malnutrition. His body just stopped working. This establishes the stakes for the villains. They are desperate. They are an endangered species running out of food. Rose checks her safe and reveals the terrifying reality. They are down to their last few canisters of steam. They need a seventh wave, a mass tragedy like 9/11 that produces high-quality suffering, but those are rare. We see their methods in action through a member named Snakebite Andy. She has the power of suggestion, a pusher ability. She effortlessly puts the campground owners, the cozies, to sleep, erasing their memories so the Knot can hold a gathering without witnesses. It's a chilling display of how easily they manipulate the rubes, their term for regular humans. The Knot gathers to feed. Rose releases steam from a canister, the essence of a boy named Richard Galesworthy who died years ago. The description is drug-like. The members inhale the silver mist, vibrating with ecstasy as it rejuvenates them. Wrinkles fade, arthritis vanishes. It's an addiction as much as a survival necessity. But the tank is running dry. They need fresh kill. The hunt begins. The Knot moves in a caravan, scanning for the psychic signature of children. Rose possesses a sonar-like ability to detect the shining. In Iowa, they pick up a signal. It's a boy named Bradley Trevor, the baseball boy, who uses a low-level shine to predict pitches. To the Knot, he isn't a child. He's livestock. The tragedy of Bradley Trevor is brutal and swift. The Knot triangulates his position. Barry the Chunk, one of the Knot's members, lures the boy into a van. The scary part is the efficiency. There is no hesitation, no moral quandary. They abduct him in broad daylight. They take Bradley to an abandoned ethanol plant. This scene is vital for understanding the horror of the true Knot. They don't just kill, they must torture. Rose explains with a terrifyingly maternal gentleness that pain purifies the steam. The more the victim suffers, the more potent the essence becomes. It's the industrialization of suffering. They circle him like wolves, and despite his pleas, they extract every ounce of life from him. Bradley dies screaming so the true Knot can live another day. They bury him, refill their canisters, and roll out onto the highway again, invisible monsters hiding behind the wheel of the American dream. Chapter 6. Weird radio. There is a specific primal frequency of terror reserved only for parents, the sound of a child screaming in the dead of night. It had been 3 years since Lucy Stone heard that sound, but the silence broke tonight. Her husband, David, was away in Boston, leaving Lucy to sprint down the hallway alone to find her daughter, Abra, locked in the grip of a night terror. Abra wasn't just scared. She was catatonic, a statue wrapped in a chaotic cocoon of bedsheets. This is the heavy psychological toll of The Shining. It doesn't just show you things. It locks you away in a room where only you can see the monsters. Lucy held her daughter, describing the sensation as hugging stone, a chilling metaphor for how trauma calcifies us, even as children. When Abra finally thawed, breaking the trance, the truth spilled out. The nightmares were back. Not just bad dreams, but the weird radio tuning in again. She spoke of a boy being hurt, a distant tragedy bleeding into her mind. But there was a new variable this time. Tony. Abra claimed she had reached out to her invisible friend, Tony, and more importantly, to Tony's father. She described a man who works at a hot spice, a child's misinterpretation of a hospice, helping people die. She even knew about a cat named Azzy. To a rational mind, this is childhood make-believe, a coping mechanism. But Lucy felt the cold prickle of truth. Her daughter was broadcasting, and someone was listening. Lucy, desperate and terrified of her daughter's fracturing reality, prayed to a god she wasn't sure was listening to just break the radio in the girl's head. But the signal had already been intercepted. Miles away on the endless ribbon of I-80, the true knot was on the move. These psychic vampires, who feed on the steam of tortured children, had felt Abra's pulse. Rose the Hat and Crow Daddy discussed the sensation. It was a massive surge of power, a looker who had accidentally brushed against their consciousness. Here we see the terrifying pragmatism of the knot. They don't view Abra as a threat, but as vintage wine meant to be cellared. They decide to let her ripen. There's a sickening patience to their immortality. They are content to wait for her steam to grow richer, banking on the fact that modern medicine and psychiatry will sedate her gift, keeping her unsuspecting until they are ready to feed. They continued west, unaware that the baseball boy, their last meal, had left a dormant contagion in their blood. Shift the scene to New Hampshire, where Dan Torrance is fighting a different kind of demon. He sat with his AA sponsor, Casey, a man who refused to let Dan coast on surface-level sobriety. They discussed the steps, specifically the need to confess the exact nature of one's wrongs. Dan is 10 years sober, but he is still haunted by the ghosts of his addiction. Not the literal ghosts of the Overlook, but the memory of a woman named Deanie and her toddler, from whom he stole money while they slept in a drug-induced stupor. This is the insidious nature of shame. It convinces you that your secrets are the glue holding you together, when in reality, they are the poison dissolving you. Casey pushed Dan to confess, warning him that we are only as sick as our secrets, and that a bottom kept hidden is a trapdoor waiting to open. Dan, stubborn and fearful, refused to speak of it. Returning to his room at the hospice, Dan found the blackboard. The message was gone, wiped clean by his own hand, but the connection remained. He realized that Abra wasn't looking for him, the adult Dan, but for Tony, his own childhood projection, the spectral brother who handled the shine when Dan was too young to bear it. He wrote back, not as Dan, but as a friend, bridging the gap between two lonely gifted children. The narrative then takes us to the intersection of the mystical and the mundane. Dan went to visit Billy Freeman, the conductor of the miniature train, the Helen Rivington. Billy was a fixture of the town, a man who seemed fine to the naked eye, but as Dan approached with coffee, the world shifted. He saw the flies. In King's law, these aren't literal insects. They are the death flies. auditory, and visual hallucinations that swarm around the terminally ill, visible only to Dan. They are the grim reapers of The Shining. Billy Freeman was covered in them. This creates a fascinating duality in Dan's life. The power that once drove him mad is now his diagnostic tool. It is the Dr. Sleep persona, manifesting not just as a comforter of the dying, but as a saver of the living. He bullied Billy into seeing a doctor, using his reputation and connections within the Old Drunks network of AA to facilitate an emergency appointment. The diagnosis was an abdominal aortic aneurysm, a ticking time bomb in Billy's chest. Because of Dan's intervention, they caught it before it ruptured. Billy was saved. But here, the story delivers a brutal psychological twist. You would think saving a friend would bring Dan peace. Instead, the emotional high, the relief, and the sudden release of tension triggered a massive craving. Victory is sometimes more dangerous to an addict than defeat. Dan found himself in the parking lot of a dive bar called the Cowboy Boot. The neon sign buzzed, promising oblivion for $2 a pitcher. The urge to drink was a physical weight, a desire to silence the shine and the responsibilities of being a hero. He stood on the precipice of destroying 10 years of sobriety in 10 minutes. This is the war of attrition that is addiction. It doesn't fight fair. It waits until your guard is down, until you feel you deserve a reward. In the end, Dan didn't go in. He called his friend John Dalton instead, talking himself off the ledge until the neon boot faded in his rearview mirror. He chose the hard reality over the easy escape. He returned to the hospice to find a new message on the blackboard: "I had a wonderful day." Dan smiled, whispering a goodnight to the girl miles away. But the chapter ends with a dark reminder of the cycle of life and death. Azzy the cat, the furry Grim Reaper of Rivington House, had curled up next to a patient named Mr. Cameron. Dan headed over to sit vigil. He would help the man cross over, just as he had helped Billy stay. For 2 years, the radio went silent. Dan worked, Abra grew, and the true knot traveled the highways, unaware that the blood of the baseball boy was slowly working inside them, a biological time bomb waiting to go off. Chapter 7. The narrative pivot of Dr. Sleep often hinges on the sudden intrusion of the malignant into the mundane, a classic Stephen King mechanism where domestic safety is shattered by biological or supernatural failure. We begin this chapter not with a monster, but with the betrayal of the human body. In August of 2013, Conchetta Reynolds, Abra's beloved Momo, wakes up in her Boston condo. She is 97, an age where the line between independence and catastrophe is terrifyingly thin. King paints a picture of routine. She misses her old dog. She heads for coffee. She walks a path she has walked thousands of times. But entropy doesn't care about routine. Without stumbling, without an external push, her hip simply snaps. It is the spontaneous fracture of the aged, a snapping sound that drops her to the floor. The horror here is grounded strictly in reality. As she lies there waiting for the agony to recede enough to move, Conchetta is forced to crawl. There is a cruel, cyclical irony here that King highlights. In 1917, she crawled across a farmyard in Italy chasing chickens. Now, nearly a century later, she crawls across a Boston floor just to reach a phone. The circle of life, as she muses, is perfectly stupid. She manages to call 911, maintaining her dignity even while broken, a testament to the steel running through the women of this family line. This accident triggers a shifting of tectonic plates in Abra Stone's life. With Momo needing surgery and diagnosed with terminal pancreatic cancer, the domestic arrangement shifts. Abra, now 13 and fresh from summer camp, begins shuttling between her divorced parents. It's a turbulent time, filled with the unspoken anxiety of impending death, but the true horror arrives via the US. Postal Service. On September 17th, Abra retrieves the mail. Among the junk is the Aniston Shopper, a local rag featuring a section titled, "Have You Seen Me?" It's a mosaic of missing children, a gallery of lost souls. King uses this to tap into a very primal parental fear, but for Abra, it's a psychic trigger. Her eyes lock onto a photo of Bradley Trevor, the baseball boy. To the world, he is missing. To Abra, the truth is far more visceral. The narrative explores the burden of the shining here. It's not just seeing ghosts. It's an invasion of unwanted knowledge. Abra knows about the freckles Bradley's mother loved. She knows he is dead. The physical reaction is immediate. She vomits in the driveway. The trauma of the shine is somatic. The body rejects the horror the mind perceives. Safe in her room, Abra tries to be a normal teenager, struggling with algebra and crushing on a boy band. But the psychic noise is too loud. She is drawn back to the newspaper. King juxtaposes the triviality of homework with the gravity of murder. Abra decides to use her far-seeing. This isn't the passive shining of her childhood. This is an active, muscular flexing of psychic power. She touches Bradley's picture and dives in. The vision is fragmented and terrifying. She sees the kidnapping. She identifies the flashlight people, the true knot, and specifically Barry the Chunk. She sees the seduction of trust, the betrayal and the location, a defunct ethanol plant in Iowa. This is psychometry on a massive scale. Abra isn't just watching a movie, she is rewinding time, pulling details like the organic industry's sign out of the ether. But then, the perspective shifts. Abra's power is too vast, too undisciplined. She pushes past the memory of the dead boy and projects herself into the present, right into the mind of one of the killers. This is the chapter's turning point, a psychic collision of epic proportions. Abra finds herself looking through the eyes of someone in a supermarket, Sam's Club in New Hampshire. She's riding the mind of Rose the Hat. The sensation is described as a turntable, spinning her from her bedroom to the grocery aisle. But Rose, an apex predator, feels the intrusion. She senses the rummaging in her head. The psychological dynamic flips instantly. The hunter becomes the hunted, but only for a second. Abra, realizing she is sharing headspace with a monster, unleashes a telepathic scream, "Get out of my head!" The force of this expulsion is cataclysmic. In the physical world, Abra's house shakes violently, a telekinetic earthquake that rattles the neighborhood. Across the state, in the supermarket, Rose the Hat is physically knocked back into a display of canned goods. Here, we get a crucial insight into the villain's mindset. Rose isn't terrified, she's exhilarated. King draws a parallel to Moby Dick. To Rose, Abra isn't just another victim, she is the white whale. The sheer volume of steam, psychic energy Abra possesses is unprecedented. Rose immediately calls Crow Daddy, her second in command. The plan changes. They won't just kill this girl for a quick meal. Rose uses a chilling agricultural metaphor. They don't want to butcher the cow. They want to keep it for milk. They plan to kidnap Abra, drug her, and feed off her immense power for years. It is a fate worse than death, eternal enslavement as a psychic battery. The chapter closes with the isolation of the gifted child. The neighborhood holds a barbecue to celebrate surviving the earthquake, oblivious to the supernatural war starting in their midst. Abra is alone with her terror. Back in her room, the horror culminates in a hallucination or perhaps a projection. She sees Rose the Hat outside her second-story window. This imagery is pure nightmare fuel. The beautiful woman in the top hat smiles, revealing the grotesque reality beneath the glamour, a single, massive, discolored tooth. It is the face of the thing that ate the baseball boy. Abra realizes her anonymity is gone. She has been seen. The suspense hits its peak as Abra understands she cannot handle this alone. The Shining connects her to a lineage of trauma and power. In her desperation, she doesn't call her parents, who wouldn't understand. She calls out to the only entity in the law who might. She screams internally for Tony, the imaginary friend, the psychic guide, the bridge to Daniel Torrance. Help me, Tony. I'm scared. It is the call to action that will finally bring the two generations of the Shining together. The prologue is over. The war has begun. Chapter 8. The narrative shifts back to the quiet rhythms of Teeny Town, specifically the sunset cruise of the miniature train, the Helen Rivington. This isn't just a job for Dan Torrance. It is a ritual of maintenance. For a man who spent decades drowning the Shining in alcohol, the repetitive circular track of the train serves as a mechanical meditation. He takes over for Billy Freeman, the elderly groundskeeper, and guides the train through the twilight. There is a profound psychological stillness here. King contrasts the chaotic noise of the Overlook Hotel from Dan's past with the silence of God holding his breath at the end of the train line. It is a peace Dan has purchased with sobriety, but in the Stephen King universe, peace is usually just the deep breath before the scream. The calm shatters abruptly. While chatting with Billy after the shift, Dan is struck by a psychic blow so violent he describes it as his head exploding. This isn't a migraine, it's an intrusion. He collapses, terrifying Billy. When Dan wakes, he plays it off as a dizzy spell, but he knows better. Someone, an incredibly powerful someone, just kicked down the front door of his mind. He instinctively covers, lying to Billy about a friend named Tony. It's a callback that chills the blood of anyone who knows the lore. Tony was the imaginary friend, projection of Danny's own future self in The Shining. But this isn't Tony. This is Abra Stone. Dan retreats to Rivington House, shaken. The psychic assault forces him to confront memories of Dick Halloran, the chef from the Overlook who first explained The Shining to him. We see here the burden of the legacy. Dan wonders if Dick is still alive, feeling the desperate need for a mentor now that he is being forced into that role himself. He realizes that the wheel of Ka, or simply fate, is turning. The student is being called to teach. He returns to his room and finds a message on his blackboard, not written by hand, but projected there. An email address. The screen name is Cadabra. The playfulness of the name belies the terror of the situation. Dan hesitates. He is a middle-aged recovering alcoholic. Contacting a teenage girl is fraught with societal red flags, but the psychic imperative overrides social norms. He types 4 words. Tell me what's wrong. A week later, the physical meeting occurs. It's a scene dripping with subtext about connection and isolation. They meet in a public space, the library lawn in Aniston, to avoid suspicion. Abra rides up on her bike, projecting a facade of normalcy. But the moment she sees Dan, she calls him Uncle Dan. It's a brilliant survival tactic, instantly creating a cover story for any onlookers. But it also speaks to a deeper truth. They are genetic strangers, yet spiritually they are the only family each other has. This chapter is titled Abra's Theory of Relativity, and here is where that lands. Abra posits that while they aren't blood relatives, the shining makes them kin. It's a shared genetic anomaly, like red hair, but infinitely more dangerous. The interaction here is fascinating because they speak on two levels simultaneously. Their mouths make small talk about school and Uncle Dan, while their minds scream at one another in capital letters. It represents the duality of the psychic life, the mundane surface, and the terrifying telepathic undercurrent. Abra drops the mask. She tells him about the baseball boy, Bradley Trevor. This is the narrative pivoting from a character study to a crime thriller. Abra didn't just see the boy die, she felt it. She describes the killers, the true not as people, but as something else. She reveals that they tortured the boy to extract his steam, their term for the shining. This is a crucial expansion of the law. The shining isn't just a power, it is a food source. It commodifies the soul. Abra provides Dan with a terrifyingly specific detail, a printout of the location where the boy is buried. It's an ethanol plant in Freeman, Iowa, owned by a shell company called Organic Industries. The horror deepens when Abra brings up the leader of this group, the woman in the hat. This triggers a repressed memory in Dan. He recalls a moment from 12 years ago, early in his sobriety, when he hallucinated a top hat blowing down a gutter and received a warning from a dead woman, Deanie, in a dream. Stay away from the woman in the hat. She'll eat you alive. It's a masterful stroke of retroactive continuity, planting the seeds of this villain deep in Dan's timeline. It suggests that the true knot has been in the periphery of his awareness for years, a predator waiting for him to slip. Abra confesses that she and the Hat Woman have momentarily connected. It happened when Abra traveled, astral projected, to the scene of the murder. The Hat Woman sensed her. This is the ticking clock. The predator knows there is a witness, and more importantly, a massive source of food out there. Abra asks Dan to promise he won't let them get her. Dan promises, but the weight of it crushes him. He knows that the only way to keep that promise is to go to war. And war is the one thing that endangers the fragile sobriety he has built his life around. After they part ways, Dan returns to the hospice, his mind reeling. He needs guidance. He finally builds up the courage to search for Dick Halloran on the internet. It is a somber moment of realization. The search results deliver the finality of mortality. Dick Halloran died of a heart attack in 1999. There will be no magical rescue from the wise old mentor. Dan is alone. He is the elder now. The chapter closes with a chilling invasion of privacy. Dan is in his room, believing he is alone, when he hears the squeak of chalk on the blackboard behind him. He turns to see a drawing forming in empty space, a baseball glove with a question mark. Abra is projecting into his room again, asking if he will help find the buried evidence. It's a plea for justice, but visually, it's a haunting. The barriers between safe spaces and the psychic battlefield have dissolved completely. The doctor is in, whether he likes it or not. Chapter 9. We begin in the shadow of impending death, deep within the walls of Rivington House, in the fall of 2013. We are with Eleanor Ouellette, a woman of 102 years, a relic of a bygone era who insists on the French pronunciation of her name. To Dan Torrance, she is simply Miss Ooh La La. The narrative here paints a stark picture of the human condition. Eleanor is biologically decimated, cancer, heart failure, organ collapse, yet she persists. It's a testament to the stubbornness of the human spirit, or perhaps just the body's refusal to get the memo. But the atmosphere shifts when we realize Azriel, the psychopomp cat, is present. Azzy is rarely wrong. Death is in the room. What follows is a scene of profound quietude that King uses to disarm us. Dan and Eleanor share a gentle rapport, a moment of kindness where Dan plays the role of the flirtatious admirer to give a dying woman one last smile. But beneath this surface-level warmth, the shining is humming. Eleanor, in her final delirium, begins to speak of visitors. She describes a parade of people passing through the walls, the voices of our dead friends. This is a crucial piece of lore. We are seeing the thinning of the veil. Eleanor mentions a boy who fell down a well and a suicide victim. To the mundane eye, this is dementia. To Dan and to us, this is the shining, manifesting at the threshold of death. It suggests that as we exit this life, the barriers that filter out the supernatural dissolve. Eleanor delivers a chilling message: you are to wait. And then she dies. The description here is visceral. The life draining away like water from a punctured basin, the dentures slipping. It is the unglamorous mechanical reality of biological cessation. But Dan stays. He waits for the gasp, the red mist of the soul leaving the body. It doesn't come. Instead, the room plunges into a supernatural strobe light show. The electricity flickers, the water pitcher rattles, and the atmosphere thickens with static. Then, the corpse speaks. This is a masterclass in horror, not the jump scare variety, but the unsettling violation of natural order. Through the dead vocal cords of Eleanor Ouellette comes the voice of Dick Halloran. The conversation that ensues creates a bridge between the shining and Dr. Sleep. The entity proving to be Dick reminds Dan of Mrs. Brandt, a woman from the Overlook Hotel who wanted the valet's pants. It's a specific, traumatic memory that authenticates the spirit. But Dick is suffering. The effort to anchor himself in the dead woman is agonizing. He warns Dan about the empty devils. This is our first true psychological profile of the true knot, from an outside spiritual perspective. Dick calls them a cancer on the skin of the world. They aren't just villains, they are spiritual voids that consume pain and screams to fill their emptiness. The warning is stark. If they catch Abra, they won't just kill her. They will turn her or scoop her out until she is a hollow shell like them. The mandate is clear. Dan cannot simply hide anymore. The ghost of his mentor tells him he owes a debt for his survival, and the only way to pay it is to protect the girl. The command is absolute. Kill them. Make them eat their own poison. As the spirit departs and the red mist finally rises from Eleanor, Dan is left with a new resolve. The concept of the empty devils reframes his entire existence. He survived the Overlook's dead devils, but these living ones are worse. He knows he must enlist help. He thinks of Billy Freeman and Dr. John Dalton. The isolationist phase of Dan Torrance's life is over. We cut to the Bluebell campground, the lair of these very devils. The juxtaposition is jarring. While Dan deals with the sanctity of death, the true knot is conducting a corporate meeting. They are discussing logistics, specifically finding the girl who shines. Rose the Hat is agitated, driven by a hunger that borders on addiction. They've narrowed the location down to 3 towns based on the lickety-split clue. There is a banality to their evil here. They use Google Earth and convenience store chains to hunt prey. It grounds the supernatural threat in a terrifyingly modern reality. Rose decides she will astrally project to find the girl, a dangerous move that highlights her arrogance. She believes she is the apex predator, unaware that the prey might have teeth. Back at the hospice, Dan begins his maneuvers. He contacts Abra via email, warning her but also validating her. It's a significant moment of connection. Uncle D reaching out. He validates her danger but advises caution. Abra's reaction is telling. She isn't paralyzed by fear. She's excited. It touches on the psychology of adolescence where danger feels like an adventure, a narrative trope she's seen in movies. She trusts Dan immediately, a psychic bond that bypasses stranger danger. Chapter 10. The narrative shifts to the Stone family, grounding us back in domestic tragedy. This chapter is titled Glass Ornaments, a metaphor for the fragility of the human body. Lucy calls David in hysterics. Her grandmother, Momo Conchetta, has fallen and shattered her arm. The horror here is medical and emotional. The description of the elderly woman's suffering, her regression to profanity due to agony, and Lucy's utter helplessness is difficult to witness. It serves a narrative purpose. It forces the family's hand. They can no longer care for Momo at home. She must be moved to a hospice, specifically Rivington House. Fate is tightening the knot. The Stone family is moving physically closer to Dan Torrance. The glass ornament metaphor suggests that while we are beautiful, we are brittle. This fragility stands in stark contrast to the near immortality the true knot seeks through murder. Speaking of the knot, we return to their camp. Rose is preparing for her astral hunt. She fasts and purges, a ritualistic cleansing to sharpen her mind. We learn that they have acquired a powerful military-grade sedative to use on Abra. The plan is becoming concrete. Drug the girl, kidnap her, and keep her as a sustainable food source. However, a crack appears in their armor. Grandpa Flick, the oldest of them, is cycling, dying. Rose orders him to be fed their precious steam, the essence of tortured children, to keep him alive. It shows the knot's desperation. They cling to life with a pathetic ferocity. Meanwhile, Jimmy Numbers finds a news article about a pocket earthquake in Anniston, New Hampshire. It confirms Abra's location. The hunt is on. Dan moves to consolidate his allies. In a scene set in Teeny Town, a miniature village that serves as a surreal backdrop for a heavy conversation, Dan meets with Billy Freeman and Dr. John Dalton. This scene is about trust and revelation. Dan has to break his anonymity, not just as an alcoholic, but as a psychic. He proves his ability to John by reading the coins in his pocket and recalling memories. He explains the reality of the true knot. They are psychic vampires who feed on the steam of children. Dan reveals the plan. They need to retrieve the baseball glove of the murdered boy, Brad Trevor. Abra believes that holding the glove will allow her to track the killers. It's psychometry, reading the history of an object. John Dalton, a man of science, is forced to accept the impossible because the evidence is sitting right in front of him. Dan frames this as a moral imperative, appealing to John's duty as a doctor. They aren't just saving one girl, they are stopping a troop of serial killers who have operated for centuries. As night falls, the stage is set for a psychic confrontation. Abra, displaying a tactical maturity beyond her years, sets a trap. She knows the woman in the hat is coming. She doesn't just lock her mental doors, She prepares an ambush. She visualizes a specific scenario, greasing the psychic wheels. Rose the Hat begins her meditation. She projects her consciousness out of her body, floating across the miles to New Hampshire. She invades the supermarket where she first sensed Abra, using the psychic residue as a tracking beacon. The description of astral travel here is disorienting and dreamlike. Darkness, muzak, and the sensation of turning the world. Rose locates Abra's mind. She perceives it as a file room, a place of storage and memory. This is Rose's fatal mistake. She views Abra as a child, a passive vessel to be rifled through. She enters the file room arrogantly, intending to steal the girl's identity and location. But when she opens a file drawer, the trap springs. An alarm blares. Spotlights blind her. The imagery shifts violently. Abra is no longer a sleeping child. In this mental construct, she is a warrior woman on a white stallion armed with a lance. The symbolism is powerful. This is Abra's self-actualized spirit, fierce and protected. Rose is caught off guard. She tries to withdraw, but the file drawer slams shut on her spectral hand. The pain is excruciating, psychosomatic but real enough to cause damage back in the physical world. Abra charges. The dialogue in this psychic space is pure will. Rose screams at Abra, trying to assert dominance, shouting that she is just a little girl. But Abra isn't listening. She is the predator now. She attacks. Rose barely manages to rip her hand free, leaving behind skin and blood in the psychic ether. But the physical injury isn't the worst part. As Rose retreats, fleeing back to her body, she feels a fluttering in her own mind, a presence. Abra hasn't just defended herself, she has counterattacked. She is now inside Rose's head, rifling through her mental files. The violator has been violated. Rose wakes up in her camper, gasping, sweating and humiliated. Her physical hand is battered, bruised and swelling, evidence that the battle was real. She is terrified, not just of the girl's power, but of the exposure. She has been seen. The hunter has become the hunted. Crow arrives with bad news. Grandpa Flick is dying, but Rose is too shaken by her encounter to care. She realizes they have drastically underestimated the steamhead. This isn't just food. This is a threat to their very existence. The chapter closes on this shift in the balance of power. The True Knot thought they were coming for a helpless child. Instead, they've kicked a hornet's nest, and the hornet is coming for them. The suspense is no longer about whether Abra will be caught, but about the impending collision between two immense forces. Dan Torrance, the reluctance gone, stands ready to pay his debt, and Abra Stone is sharpening her lance. Chapter 11. The atmosphere inside Grandpa Flick's Fleetwood is usually a mix of expensive cigars and pine air freshener, a mask of civility over a rotting soul. But today, the mask has slipped. The air is thick with the smell of excrement, disease, and impending death. This is a pivotal moment in the lore of the True Knot. For the first time in ages, the immortals are realizing they are mortal. The True Knot has gathered, stun-gunned by the reality of a dying comrade. Rose the Hat, maintaining her role as the alpha matriarch, clears the room of the rubes and the useless, keeping only Crow Daddy and Walnut. When they examine the dying ancient, the diagnosis is almost insulting in its banality. It isn't a supernatural strike or a grand cosmic judgment. It's the measles. Walnut identifies the Koplik's spots. It's absurd. It's grotesque. A creature that has lived for centuries, is being taken down by a childhood illness that most modern children are vaccinated against. This creates a terrifying realization for Rose. The steam they inhaled from the baseball boy wasn't just food, it was a carrier. They are not immune to the diseases of the prey they hunt. It's a biological checkmate. The predator has choked on its meal. As Grandpa Flick begins to cycle, we get a dose of pure Stephen King body horror. He flickers between opacity and transparency, his internal organs becoming visible through milky skin like a biological map of decay. It's a visceral reminder that the true knot are empty vessels, defined only by what they consume. When he finally passes, he doesn't just die, he erases. He cycles until even his bones vanish, leaving behind only the stain of his hair tonic and his soiled clothes. The knot's chanting of Lod Samhanti follows, a cultish ritual that binds them in their fear. They are the chosen ones, they claim, but they have never looked more like scared animals huddling in the dark. Meanwhile, the narrative shifts to Dan Torrance and Abra Stone, offering a sharp contrast to the decay of the knot. Abra and Dan meet near the library, and we see the evolution of Abra's power. She isn't just a victim, she's becoming a hunter. She reveals to Dan that she has rifled through Rose's mind, visualizing it as a library of files. This is classic psychic architecture, the mind as a physical space. Abra drops two massive pieces of intel. First, the nature of steam. It's not blood, it's the psychic essence, the gasp of a dying child, which the knot bottles like vintage wine. Second, she reveals the location of the knot's last kill, the baseball boy, Bradley Trevor. She pushes Dan toward action. It's no longer enough to hide. They have to dig. Dan and Dr. John Dalton fly to Iowa. This road trip serves as a mobile confessional. For the first time, Dan opens up to a normal person about the full extent of his trauma. He tells John about the Overlook Hotel. This is crucial character work. Dan frames his father, Jack Torrance, not just as a monster, but as a dry drunk who was vulnerable to the hotel's corruption because he never dealt with his addiction. It's a profound psychological insight. The ghosts of the Overlook didn't create the cracks in Jack Torrance, they just filled them. Dan is trying to ensure he doesn't repeat that history, using his shine to clean up the mess rather than cause it. They arrive at the desolate ethanol plant in Freeman, Iowa. The setting is pure American Gothic, abandoned industry, endless cornfields, and the silence of a grave. King often uses these forgotten spaces of Americana as the playgrounds for his monsters. The excavation scene is the emotional anchor of the chapter. Dan allows Abra to possess him from across the country to guide the search. The sensation is described with intimacy and violation, her eyes seeing through his, her tears wetting his face. It blurs the line between two individuals, reinforcing the concept of the Tet, or the spiritual bond between shiners. When they find the body, the reality of the true knot's evil hits home. It isn't abstract anymore. It's a rotting child in a shallow grave. The detail that breaks them and the reader is the baseball glove still clutched in the boy's skeletal hand. The name printed inside Tome 25 transforms Bradley Trevor from a plot device into a real lost boy who loved a specific baseball player. It's a masterclass in using small, specific details to generate maximum heartbreak and fury. This isn't just a retrieval mission. It's the catalyst that turns Dan Torrance from a reluctant guardian into a vengeful protector. He swears to destroy them, and we believe him. Back in the world of the villains, Rose is plotting. She sends Crow Daddy and a strike team to capture Abra. The measles diagnosis has changed the mission parameters. They don't just want Abra for food anymore. They believe her steam, processed by her own immunity, is the vaccine they need to survive the plague sweeping through them. Abra represents both their greatest threat and their only salvation. The stakes have escalated from a feeding frenzy to a desperate struggle for survival. The chapter closes with the veil finally lifting for the mundane world. Dan and John realize they can't do this alone. They need Abra's parents, but Abra beats them to it. In a scene of domestic disruption, Abra sits at her kitchen table, clutching her stuffed rabbit, a visual reminder that she is still just a child despite her terrifying power. She drops the mask of normalcy she's been wearing for her parents. She tells her father, David, the truth. To prove it, she doesn't just use words. She flings the kitchen drawers open with her mind. It's a terrifying awakening for David Stone. The daughter he thought he knew is gone, replaced by something ancient and powerful. The chapter ends on this precipice. The secret war is no longer secret. The domestic sphere has been breached, the monsters are on the road, and the little girl with the teddy bear is ready to go to war. The suspense is pulled taut. The race to Aniston is on. Chapter 12. They call it steam. 1. The return to New Hampshire isn't a victory lap. It's a march into the line of fire. When Dan Torrance and John Dalton land at Logan Airport, the tension is palpable. John's phone floods with missed calls, a digital accumulation of panic from Abra's father, Dave Stone. There's a psychological weight here. Dan is stepping out of the shadows of his anonymous life and dragging a respected doctor with him. They know they're walking into a domestic ambush. Dave Stone isn't just a confused parent. He's the barrier of rationality that Dan has to break through. When they arrive at the Stone residence, the atmosphere is brittle. Dave is looking at Dan not as a savior, but as a predator who has been secretly communicating with his daughter. It's the classic King setup, the horror of the supernatural clashing with the mundane horror of parental fear. 2. Inside the house, the dynamic shifts. It's an interrogation. Dave Stone is desperate to protect his family, unaware that the threat is something his suburban worldview can't encompass. Dan and John have to dismantle his denial piece by piece. They present the evidence, not ghost stories, but the grim reality of a murder. The baseball glove. This object acts as a totem of trauma. When Abra explains the baseball boy was tortured and buried with it, the narrative pivots from mystery to visceral horror. We see the contrast between Abra's innocence and the dark knowledge she possesses. She knows about the True Knot's special tooth and their hunger. It's a chilling reminder that in this universe, psychic ability is a conduit for experiencing other people's pain. 3. Meanwhile, on the highway, the True Knot is closing in. This scene perfectly illustrates the banality of evil. These aren't monsters in a castle. They're retirees in a Winnebago using 4G networks to hunt children. Jimmy Numbers, the Knot's tech expert, has hacked school databases, pulling up photos of Abra and her friends. It's a violation of privacy that feels sickeningly modern. Crow, the right-hand man, identifies Abra from her photo, not by her features, but by the steamy look in her eyes. But there's a complication. Barry the Chunk, their locator, is sick. A red spot on his wrist signals the beginning of the end. The predators are becoming prey to biology. 4. Back in the living room, the skepticism finally cracks. Abra reveals the depth of the Knot's depravity, explaining how they consume pain, what they call steam. But the turning point comes when she touches the baseball glove. This is psychometry, reading the history of an object. The reaction is violent. The psychic residue on the glove is so toxic it physically hurts her. She channels the dead boy's final moments and realizes the knot isn't just wandering, they are coming specifically for her, and they are coming tomorrow. The suspense ramps up here because the timeline has collapsed. It's no longer a vague threat. It's an imminent invasion. 5. Abra's vision reveals a critical weakness in the enemy. Barry has the measles. For a human, it's an illness. For the semi-immortal true knot, whose immune systems have atrophied over centuries, it's a plague. Abra realizes they need her not just for food, but for a cure. They believe her steam, her essence, can inoculate them. This twists the dynamic. The knot is desperate, and desperation makes them sloppy. Dan Torrance watches this unfold, and for him, it's a flashback to the Overlook. The evil has changed faces, but the hunger remains the same. He realizes they can't run. If they run, the knot will just buy their way out of trouble and keep hunting. They have to stand and fight. 6. On the road, the situation for the true knot deteriorates. Barry is feverish, losing his ability to function. Crow calls Rose the Hat, the queen of this hive. Her voice over the phone betrays a flicker of fear, something Crow hates to hear. It humanizes the villains just enough to make them more terrifying. They have a survival instinct. Rose orders them to capture the girl at all costs. The logic is cold and predatory. If the girl can save the tribe, her life is forfeit. The knot is a dying organism, fighting for its last breath, and that makes them infinitely more dangerous than a comfortable predator. 7. The strategy session at the Stone House shifts from defense to offense. Dan proposes a trap. He knows he can't use Abra as bait physically, but her mind can project her presence. They decide to use the geography of the town against the invaders. Billy Freeman, the elderly groundskeeper, joins the fray, bringing hardware, a World War II-era pistol. It's a moment of grim resolve. They aren't relying on magic to kill the knot. They're going to use bullets. The plan centers on the teeny town railroad, a location that juxtaposes childhood joy with the coming violence. The chapter ends on a dark note. Abra, the innocent child, smiles, and it's a smile of vengeance. She says, they deserve it. This is the psychological cost of the war. To fight monsters, Abra has to tap into her own capacity for cruelty. The stage is set for a confrontation at the Gap. Chapter 13. The banality of evil often hides in plain sight, tucked away in strip malls between coffee shops and auto parts stores. For the true knot, a group of psychic vampires slowly rotting from the inside out, the easy mail services was just another stop. Crow Daddy, maintaining the charade of normalcy, signed for a package that contained the machinery of abduction, tranquilizers and a dart gun. It was a cold, calculated kit designed to bring down a child of immense power. Back in the Winnebago, the air was thick with the smell of sickness. Barry the Chunk was dying, his body cycling, a horrific state where the physical form flickers in and out of existence, revealing the raw meat and bone beneath. It's a reminder that these creatures, for all their posturing as superior beings, are tethered to a biology that is currently failing them. Barry, feverish and fading, offered the crucial intelligence. The girl, Abra, was heading to a picnic at Cloud Gap. He sensed her fear of Rose the Hat, but he also sensed something else, a toy train. In his delirium, he mistook the real location for a plaything, a fatal error born of a dying mind. He believed if they could just torture the steam out of her, It might heal him. It is a desperate parasitical hope, the logic of an addict looking for one last fix to cure a terminal illness. Meanwhile, Abra Stone was performing a psychic high-wire act that would break a lesser mind. She was bilocating, keeping one foot in her middle school classroom and the other inside Dan Torrance's head as he drove the miniature train toward the trap. It requires a dissociation that borders on schizophrenia, a splitting of the self that King uses to illustrate the burden of the shining. She navigated the social minefield of school while simultaneously tasting Dan's ham sandwich. But the connection was a two-way street. The true knot, sensing an intruder, blasted a psychic distraction, a pornographic image of group sex meant to shock the young girl out of the ether. It's a violation, a psychic assault intended to rattle her innocence, but Abra is made of sterner stuff. She retreated to the safety of a Scrabble game with her friend Emma, grounding herself in the mundane to maintain her grip on the supernatural. As the Knots convoy moved out, the reality of their plague set in. Barry finally succumbed, his body collapsing inward and vanishing, leaving only empty clothes. It is a death without dignity, a complete erasure of self. The infection spread to Jimmy Numbers next. The red spots of the measles, a disease that devastates their immune-deficient ancient bodies, blooming on his skin. There is a grim irony here. Creatures who have hunted children for centuries are being undone by a childhood illness. Desperation took the wheel. They abandoned caution, speeding toward Cloud Gap, believing they were the hunters, unaware they were driving into a kill box. On the train, the atmosphere was deceptively calm. Dan, driving the Helen Rivington, listened to Dave Stone recount family secrets about Abra's grandmother. It's a quiet moment of bonding, the calm before the storm, grounding the characters in human history before the inhuman violence begins. They arrived at Cloud Gap, a place of stunning autumn beauty, the leaves turning to fire against the blue sky. The setting is classic King, the juxtaposition of natural splendor with impending doom. The picnic area was empty, a stage set for violence. John Dalton, the doctor, hid in the woods with a rifle, transforming from a healer into a soldier, a necessary corruption of his oath to survive the night. Abra, back in her physical body at her friend's house, feigned illness to lock herself in the bathroom. She needed total focus. She wasn't just watching, she was the director of this play. But as she reached out, she realized the terrifying truth too late. The pieces on the board weren't all there. The Knots Winnebago rolled into the picnic area. Out stepped the extraction team, Snakebite Andy, Walnut, and the man in the fishing shirt. To the untrained eye, they looked like retirees on a leaf-peeping tour. But Dan saw the truth. The tattoos, the syringes, the predatory hunger. They were confident, arrogant in their immortality. They threatened Dan, demanding the girl. Dan, channeling the dark wit of his father, pointed to Abra's stuffed rabbit, Hoppy. That's as close as you'll get. Andy, the woman with the snake tattoo, tried to use her voice, a hypnotic suggestion to put Dan to sleep. It's the siren's call, a power that has likely claimed countless victims. It almost worked, Dan's eyelids growing heavy, the will to fight draining away. But the psychic scream from Abra shattered the spell. "Where's the crow?" The realization hit Dan like a physical blow. The leader wasn't there. Chaos erupted. The illusion of the peaceful picnic shattered in a hail of gunfire. It wasn't cinematic, it was brutal and clumsy. Dan fired, missing, but the noise broke the stalemate. Dave Stone emerged from the woods, not as a suburban dad, but as a father protecting his cub, spraying bullets that tore into Walnut. The doctor of the True Knot fell, his body immediately beginning to cycle, blood and bone flickering in and out of reality. It is a grotesque visual, the biological cohesion failing instantly upon death. Andy charged Dave with a syringe, a feral creature cornered. She wasn't human in that moment. She was pure rage. But John Dalton, the man of medicine, intervened with brute force, slamming a rifle butt into her face. The crack of bone was sickeningly real. Andy collapsed, her jaw shattered, her immortality stripped away by blunt trauma. The aftermath was a scene of horror. Walnut dissolved into nothingness. Andy, broken and dying, looked up at her captors. There was no repentance, only spite. She cursed them as rubes, clinging to her superiority even as her body failed. But under pressure, the truth spilled out with her blood. Crow Daddy wasn't in the Winnebago. He hadn't come to the ambush. He had gotten off the bus in Anniston. The blood ran cold in Dan's veins. Anniston was where Abra was. The trap had worked, but it had caught the wrong prey. They had slaughtered the foot soldiers while the general flanked them. Dan rushed to the Winnebago, finding it empty, the stench of sickness clinging to the upholstery. Abra's panic flooded his mind, a chaotic torrent of fear. And then a new presence slammed into Dan's consciousness. Rose the Hat. The connection was open. Rose, miles away, felt the death of her tribe. Her rage was a psychic nuclear detonation. Dan saw her, a creature of terrible dark beauty, her vanity stripped away to reveal the monster beneath. She saw him too. The war had shifted. The physical battle at Cloud Gap was over, leaving only empty clothes and blood on the pine needles. But the real danger was just beginning. Crow Daddy was loose in Abra's hometown, a wolf unbeknownst to the sheep, and the protectors were 20 miles away. The victory at the picnic ground tasted like ash. They had won the skirmish, but they might have just lost the girl. Chapter 14. Inside the suffocating atmosphere of the Winnebago, the air was thick with the stench of decay. Barry the Chunk was in the final stages of cycling, a biological horror unique to the True Knot, where the body breaks down to prepare for a new influx of steam. It's a visceral reminder that these beings, despite their human appearance, are ancient parasites rotting from the inside out. Barry, struggling through his pain, confirmed a terrifying suspicion. Abra Stone was stronger than they imagined. She wasn't just hiding, she was projecting a psychic decoy. She was gaming them. Crow Daddy, the Knot's tactical pragmatist, realized the precariousness of their situation. While Rose the Hat operated on obsession and hubris, Crow operated on survival instincts. He looked at the map, pinpointing Anniston, New Hampshire. Trusting his gut, a predator's intuition, he abandoned the mission to Cloud Gap. He left the RV, sensing that the main plan was walking into a trap. This moment defines Crow not just as a henchman, but as a formidable antagonist. He is the only one smart enough to see the board clearly. Crow arrived in Anniston, adopting the camouflage of the everyman. He bought a Red Sox cap, blending seamlessly into the New England backdrop. It's a classic king trope, the monster hiding in plain sight looking like your neighbor. He tracked Abra to her home on Richland Court, observing a pickup truck guarding the house. Inside sat Billy Freeman. When Crow saw Abra give Billy a thumbs up, the truth clicked into place. The girl was the steamhead, and the team at Cloud Gap was walking into a massacre. With the cold efficiency of a seasoned killer, Crow approached Billy's truck. He feigned the role of a lost traveler, using a harmless smile to lower Billy's defenses, just long enough to jam a hypodermic needle into the old man's neck. As Billy slumped over, Crow hijacked the truck. Suddenly, a blinding white light seared Crow's vision. It wasn't physical. It was the psychic shockwave of the true Knot dying. In Cloud Gap, Snakebite, Jimmy Numbers, and the others were being slaughtered. The connection between the Knot members is a hive mind. When one dies, the others feel the severance. Crow felt 3 distinct deaths. He was alone now, behind enemy lines, fueled by a mixture of adrenaline and a desire for retribution. Inside the house, Abra was psychically witnessing the victory at Cloud Gap, unaware that the real danger was walking through her back door. Her mind was suddenly assaulted by Rose the Hat. This mental duel highlights the sheer scale of Abra's power. She didn't just resist the ancient vampire, she physically shoved Rose out of her head. But the victory was short-lived. Reality shifted, and Crow Daddy was standing in her kitchen. The sanctity of the home was shattered. Crow moved with terrifying speed, catching Abra as she tried to flee. He injected her with a sedative, a calculated dose, enough to subdue but not kill the livestock. As Abra's consciousness faded, she looked at this monster who wore a human smile and realized her friends were gone. Crow carried her out to the garage, loading her and the unconscious Billy into the truck. He found a gun in the glove box, a lucky break that shifted his power from purely chemical to lethal force. He called Rose. The conversation revealed a fractured leadership. Rose was grieving and vengeful, ordering Crow to bring the girl or kill her if cornered. Crow, however, felt alive. The danger exhilarated him. He was driving a stolen truck with 2 hostages, heading west into the darkness. Hours later, the reality of the kidnapping set in during a stop for gas. Crow woke Abra, playing a twisted psychological game. He called her Goldilocks, affecting a charming fatherly persona that made the violence underneath even more unsettling. He forced her to pump the gas, holding the needle over Billy's leg as leverage. This creates a claustrophobic tension. Abra is drugged and isolated, her immense psychic power dampened by chemistry and fear. Crow's arrogance shone through when he quoted Shakespeare, mocking her. He allowed her a moment of dignity to use the restroom, but the threat remained absolute. Inside the cold fluorescent bathroom, Abra tried to summon her power, to reach out to Dan Torrance, but the drug made her mind feel like it was pushing a heavy stone wheel. She sent a desperate, weak signal into the void. Dan, please. Her answer was not a psychic rescue, but the sharp, impatient honk of the truck horn. Time was up. The monster was waiting. Chapter 15. The aftermath of violence is rarely quiet. It echoes. Following the ambush at Cloud Gap, Dan Torrance isn't celebrating. He is haunted by a rhythmic mental itch, a phrase repeating like a broken record. You will remember what was forgotten. It's a psychic residue, a fragment of the shining that smells distinctively of his childhood imaginary friend Tony. It's a warning system. The true Knot's Winnebago is abandoned, a vessel of spiritual rot left to forensic inevitability, while the group retreats on the train. But the atmosphere is thick with dread because David Stone, clutching his daughter's stuffed rabbit, is beginning to fracture. This creates a potent tension between the supernatural and the mundane. We have Dan and John Dalton, veterans of the bizarre, trying to manage a terrified father who is realizing his reality has shattered. When Dave finally gets a signal and calls home, the nightmare confirms itself. Abra isn't just missing. She's been surgically removed from her life. She feigned cramps to go home, and now she is gone. The psychological weight here is crushing. Dave is a man of logic, forcing himself to accept a world of psychic vampires, and his only lifeline is the recovering alcoholic who orchestrated the plan that left his daughter vulnerable. Dan's internal monologue shifts to the Overlook Hotel. That nagging phrase, "Remember what was forgotten," clicks. It wasn't just a ghost story, it was a mechanical reality. The boiler, the pressure. If you don't dump the pressure, the hotel explodes. It's a metaphor for Dan's current mental state and the escalating stakes. He retreats into his own mind, not to hide, but to hunt. He opens himself up, turning his consciousness into a receiver, scanning the static of the universe for Abra's frequency, and then the connection snaps into place. But it's not a distress call, it's a command. Swapsies. King masterfully inverts the damsel in distress trope here. Abra isn't waiting to be saved. She is initiating a high-level psychic maneuver. She is drugged and weak, incapable of physical resistance, so she proposes a trade. She will take Dan's comatose, tranced-out body in the safety of the Suburban, and Dan will inhabit her drugged teenage body in the clutches of the enemy. It is a terrifying intimacy, a metaphysical sliding of bolts. The transition is visceral. One moment Dan is in the car, the next he is staring at dingy bathroom tiles, inhabiting the physiology of a 12-year-old girl. He is with Crow Daddy. The psychological horror here is palpable. Dan is trapped in a vessel, flooded with sedatives, disoriented by the new center of gravity and the weakness of the limbs. But Crow Daddy makes a fatal error. He sees a little girl. He doesn't realize that behind those eyes sits a man who has battled ghosts, addiction, and trauma for decades. He doesn't know he's looking at the doctor. Crow drags Abra out to the truck, threatening to execute Billy Freeman, who is driving. Dan plays the role, conserving energy, waiting for the switchboard of Abra's mind to present itself. He finds the controls, the shine. When Crow starts driving, the tables turn violently. Dan doesn't just nudge the steering wheel. He exerts a crushing telekinetic grip. The scene in the truck is a masterclass in claustrophobic suspense. It's a silent battle of wills. Crow feels the pressure as eye cuffs, a freezing metal band crushing his skull. The gun becomes an anchor, weighing impossibly heavy. This is the Shining weaponized not as a flare, but as a vice. Crow tries to fight back, but he is outmatched by Dan's discipline. The irony is staggering. The predator is locked in a cage with something far more dangerous than himself. The gun turns. It's a slow, grinding execution. Crow realizes too late that the consciousness staring back at him is cold, sober, and utterly ruthless. The gun fires, killing Crow Daddy and obliterating the True Knot's second in command. Simultaneously, we shift to the True Knot's encampment to witness the fallout. This provides essential context to the villain's fragility. Rose the Hat feels Crow's death instantly. Her reaction is a mix of grief and animalistic rage. She screams, physically assaulting her followers. But beneath the rage, there is panic. The Knot is dying. We learn that the measles, the rubella picked up from their last victim, is tearing through them. They are immortal yet rotting. Rose's leadership is stripped bare here. She sees her family wanting to cut and run, terrified of the steamhead girl. To keep them in line, she weaponizes their fear and their sickness. She forces them to look at the rash on Big Mo's arm. She binds them with a cult-like mantra. We are the True Knot, and we endure. It's a chilling look at cult dynamics. They stay not out of loyalty, but out of the terror of being alone and sick. She promises them the ultimate fix. Abra's steam will cure them. It's the logic of the junkie. One last big hit to solve all problems. Back in the truck, the cleanup begins. Dan, still in Abra's body, has to manage a confused Billy Freeman. The physical comedy of Dan trying to drive a truck with legs that act too short is grimly funny, adding a layer of surrealism to the body disposal. He forces Billy to sober up using a spray of soda, a harsh awakening. They need to get to safety to reverse the swap. The return to their own bodies is the exhale after the sprint. Dan wakes up in the Suburban, disoriented but whole. Abra wakes up in a motel room with Billy. The connection remains, however. The psychic umbilical cord hasn't been fully severed, it's just dormant. The chapter closes with Rose, and the imagery is pure nightmare fuel. She retreats to her Earth cruiser to huff steam, the sole essence of tortured children. It's her drug, her sustenance, and her coping mechanism. As she inhales the pain, her physiology shifts, her jaw unhinging, revealing the monstrous entity beneath the beautiful bohemian mask. She breaks the steering wheel in a fit of strength, licking the blood from her palms. But the dynamic has fundamentally shifted. When she reaches out with her mind, she doesn't find a frightened victim. Abra's message is clear and predatory. I'll come to you. The hunter has become the hunted. The suspense is no longer about whether Abra can escape. It's about what happens when these two immovable forces finally collide. Dan has proven that the true knot can bleed, and Abra has promised she knows how to make it happen. Chapter 16. That which was forgotten. The narrative tension tightens immediately as Dan Torrance steps into the role of general. Outside the safety of the mundane world, he convinces Dave Stone to trust him, to prioritize the dying over the living, if only for a moment. It is a gamble of faith. They leave Dave at the condo and head for Massachusetts General Hospital, entering the domain of antiseptic smells and the lingering resonance of mortality, a familiar atmosphere for Dan, who has spent years as Dr. Sleep, easing the transition of the dying. Arriving at the bedside of Conchetta Reynolds, we see the profound difference between Dan's use of the shining and the predation of the true knot. While Rose the Hat feeds on pain to extend life, Dan uses his gift to soothe, to communicate across the veil. Conchetta is comatose, a skeleton beneath a sheet, yet Dan reaches into the darkness. He acts as a psychopomp, a spiritual guide. He wakes her, not with adrenaline, but with the telepathic comfort of shared memory. Italy, well water, the feeling of sun on skin. In this intimacy, Conchetta recognizes him as a gift from God. It is a crucial thematic inversion. The power that drove his father mad is here redeemed as a tool of mercy. He takes her steam, her dying essence, not to consume it, but to carry it to Abra. It is a transaction of love rather than gluttony. As Conchetta passes, Dan feels the lights going out one by one, a peaceful surrender to the universe, contrasting sharply with the violent, terrified deaths the true knot inflicts. The silence of death is shattered by the arrival of Lucy Stone. She is a whirlwind of grief and protective rage, unaware that her grandmother has just found peace. But the confrontation shifts from anger to shock as Dan reveals the truth that has been hiding in plain sight. He leads her to a mirror, framing their faces together. The resemblance is undeniable. He reveals that Jack Torrance, the monster of the Overlook, the alcoholic writer, was father to them both. This revelation recontextualizes the entire story. It is not merely coincidence. It is the gravity of blood and trauma pulling the family back together. Lucy, reeling from the loss of her grandmother and the abduction of her daughter, must now process that her half-brother is the man standing before her. Dan explains the history, the affair, the broken lineage, and the shared mouth-rubbing tic that Abra inherited from a grandfather she never knew. King masterfully weaves the concept of generational echoes here. We see how habits, talents, and curses bleed through the bloodlines. Back at Conchetta's condo, the group, Dan, John, Lucy, and Dave, regroups. They find a message from Abra scrawled in spilled sugar. "I'm okay." Even in distance, the telepathic bond holds. But the conversation turns dark as Dan explains the nature of their enemy. He outlines the True Knots biology, describing them as parasites who feed on the steam of special children. But he also reveals their vulnerability. The measles that killed the baseball boy are tearing through the knot. It is a brilliant stroke of irony. These near-immortals are being decimated by a common childhood illness. Their immune systems, unexposed to human viruses for decades or centuries, are collapsing. However, the most chilling realization comes when Dan investigates the location of the True Knots base. He looks up the Bluebell campground in Sidewinder, Colorado. For the reader and for Dan, the geography is a punch to the gut. The campground sits on the ruins of the Overlook Hotel. The Roof of the World platform stands exactly where the hotel once loomed. This is Stephen King's concept of the bad place manifest. The Overlook may be gone, burned to the ground, but the wound in the world remains. It draws evil to it like a magnet. The True Knot didn't just happen to settle there. They were pulled by the psychic resonance of the site. Dan realizes he must return to the place where his childhood ended, the place where his father died. It is the classic hero's journey descent. To save the future Abra, he must face the ghosts of the past. Chapter 17. Bitch Girl. We shift perspective to the Crown Motel in New Hampshire, where the atmosphere is thick with fog and dread. But Abra Stone is not cowering. The dynamic of predator and prey is about to be violently inverted. At 13, Abra possesses a ferocity that Dan Torrance never had as a child. She is not just a lighthouse. She is a weapon. Following Dan's instructions, she initiates a psychological attack. She calls the payphone at the Bluebell campground. When Rose the Hat answers, expecting fear, she is met with pure vitriol. Abra taunts her, calling her a coward and a bitch girl. This is calculated provocation. Dan knows that Rose is a narcissist, ancient and arrogant. To be insulted by a child, a rube, disrupts Rose's cool calculation. The dialogue here is electric. Abra weaponizes her youth, mocking Rose's age and the sickness rotting her tribe of cowards. She quotes Shakespeare and jeers at the dying members of the Knot, effectively telling Rose that her friends are choking to death on their own sins. This isn't just bravado, it is a tactical lure. Abra challenges Rose to a single combat at the Roof of the World on Monday. Rose's reaction is a terrifying mix of maternal cooing and demonic rage. She tries to maintain her persona of the sophisticated traveler, calling Abra dear. But the cracks show. She is physically squeezing her own throat in frustration. The psychological blow lands. Rose, who believes herself a god among insects, is being told she is nothing but a scavenger. However, the tragedy of the True Knot is also laid bare. We see Rose comforting silent Sari, who is grieving the loss of her partner, Snakebite Andy. Rose offers a twisted comfort, revenge, and then feeds Sari her own steam to strengthen her. It is a grotesque parody of the communion Dan shared with Conchetta, where Dan gave comfort, Rose distributes hatred. As the chapter closes, the pieces are moving across the board. The true knot is dying, desperate and dangerous. Abra is terrified but resolved, vomiting from the stress of the confrontation yet unwilling to back down. And Dan, preparing for the final journey west, looks into the bathroom mirror. In a final visceral image of foreboding, Dan sees his reflection not as himself, but covered in flies. In the lore of The Shining, flies are the harbingers of rot, the manifestations of the Overlook's evil and the signature of Beelzebub. The message is clear. The hotel knows he is coming. The ghosts are waking up. Chapter 18. The silence in John Dalton's SUV wasn't born of hostility, but of pure exhaustion. It's the kind of heavy quiet Stephen King often utilizes to signal the calm before a storm, where the weight of what's coming presses down harder than what's been left behind. When they finally reached the Crown Motel, the reunion wasn't just physical, it was a psychic collision. Abra was already waiting on the bumper of Billy's truck, and when the sun hit her, it felt like divine intervention, a spotlight from God. For a brief moment, the horror genre takes a back seat to the primal connection between mother and daughter, a mother and child reunion that brings a rare, strange smile to Dan Torrance's face. But in this narrative, peace is always transient. The logistics of survival take over. They convene in a motel room devouring pizza and strategy. The skepticism of the parents, Lucy and David, clashes with the supernatural reality Dan and Abra live in. Lucy wants to run, but running is a luxury they don't have. King masterfully inverts the parent-child dynamic here. The adults are helpless, and the child, the 13-year-old Abra, is the heavy artillery. She knows Rose the Hat won't stop. It's the obsession of the predator. Once they have the scent, they hunt until they feed or die. The plan is set, and it's a terrifying one. Abra will act as bait, projecting herself across the country while staying physically safe in New Hampshire. Dan and Billy Freeman will drive into the lion's den in Colorado. The separation is necessary, but it fractures the group's safety. Billy refuses to let Dan go alone. It's a testament to King's constant reader themes of loyalty found in unlikely places. An old man and a recovering alcoholic heading west to kill monsters. As they part ways, the psychological toll on Dan becomes physically manifest. He is sick, violently so. He's carrying a secret payload, a weapon stored in the lockboxes of his mind, a mental mechanic Dan has used since The Shining to trap the ghosts of the Overlook. But this lockbox is leaky. He's sweating, vomiting, and seeing visions of the Overlook's hedge animals and the rotting woman from room 217. It creates a suffocating atmosphere of dread. Dan is literally poisoning himself to save Abra. They drive through the American heartland, a landscape King often paints as both mundane and menacing. While Billy drives, Dan communicates telepathically with Abra. The bond is instantaneous and powerful, crossing half a continent. Abra plays her part perfectly, baiting Rose the Hat with a phone call, radiating teenage insolence to mask the trap. Rose, blinded by her hunger and arrogance, takes the bait. She thinks she's dealing with a Rube family, unaware she's being corralled by a master of The Shining. There is a pivotal, quiet moment when they reach Colorado. They stop in Boulder at a dilapidated apartment building where Dan lived with his parents before the Overlook destroyed them. King loves to explore the cyclical nature of trauma. And here Dan confronts the ghost of his father, Jack Torrance. He stands where he once waited for a father he loved and feared. It's a somber reflection on alcoholism and the thirsty nature of their bloodline, a thirst Dan quenched with booze and the true knot quenches with steam. Both are addictions that destroy the soul. It grounds the supernatural battle in a very human tragedy before they ascend into the mountains. Chapter 19. The narrative shifts to a split-screen tension. In New Hampshire, the sun is setting. Abra sits on her back stoop, clutching her stuffed rabbit, Hoppy. To her parents, she looks like a vulnerable child reverting to comfort objects. In reality, she is entering a trance state, projecting her consciousness thousands of miles away. The psychological horror here is the parents' helplessness. They can only watch as their daughter goes catatonic, her mind serving as the front line of a psychic war. Meanwhile, Dan and Billy arrive at the Bluebell campground, sitting in the shadow of where the Overlook Hotel once stood. The geography itself is haunted. King treats locations like characters, and this place, the roof of the world, is a battery of bad memories and ancient evil. The true knot has set up shop here, arrogant in their numbers. Rose the Hat is waiting on the observation platform, a spider in her web. But King reveals her paranoia. She hasn't just relied on her power, she has set a physical trap. She has hidden Silent Sari, a member of the knot with the ability to fade into the background, in a shed with a sickle. It's a reminder that for all their supernatural power, these creatures are base killers. Rose plans to let the bitch girl come to her, then have Sari butcher her. The suspense ratchets up because we know Dan is walking into a physical ambush while barely holding onto his own consciousness. As Dan walks the path, the pain in his gut is searing, a rat on fire chewing his insides. He reaches out to Abra and she manifests, not physically but as a ghosty person, a projection. Dan pulls her into a mental construct, a memory of his childhood room at the Overlook. This is a fascinating glimpse into how the Shining functions. Dan creates a safe harbor within the nightmare, a place where the past defines the present. But even in this sanctuary, Abra senses the danger. She feels the monster inside Dan, the weapon he's hiding. The trap springs, but not the one Rose expected. Billy Freeman initiates the distraction. He's parked the truck and set up a mannequin in the passenger seat to look like Abra. Rose, watching from high above, is initially fooled. But when Billy steps out and performs a drunk-style cartwheel, a bizarre, chaotic act, Rose realizes something is wrong. The girl in the truck is plastic. The real threat is already inside the wire. Rose realizes too late that the uncle is a diversion. She sprints for the lodge, her psychic alarm bells ringing. But Dan is already there. He steps into the main room where the true knot is gathered, huddled together like junkies in a den. They are sick with the measles, weak and desperate. This is the moment of release. Dan opens the leaky lockbox in his mind. He isn't throwing a punch, he's exhaling a plague. He breathes out the dying essence of Conchetta Reynolds, the steam infected with cancer, and more importantly to the true knot, the measles. It manifests as a red mist, a cloud of tainted blood. The irony is palpable and grimly satisfying. The true knot, who have spent centuries preying on children to extend their lives, are undone by a childhood disease. They inhale the red mist, thinking it's food, only to realize it's poison. Dan watches them die. It's a brutal, chaotic scene. They howl, they cycle through death, and they rot instantly. The narrative doesn't shy away from the grotesque. They dissolve into their clothes, their immortality stripped away by a biological weapon delivered psychically. Abra, witnessing this through their link, is savage. There is no softness in her victory. She taunts them as they die, shouting, "How does my Momo taste?" It's a chilling reminder that Abra has a touch of the monster in her too, a necessary ruthlessness to survive in King's world. Rose arrives just in time to feel her family die. The psychic backlash hits her like shrapnel. She is the last one left, save for the hidden silent Sari. The grief and rage nearly break her, but Rose is a survivor. She realizes that while her clan is dead, the steamhead responsible, Dan, is physically weak and within reach. She resets her hat, a gesture of defiant vanity, and reaches out with her mind. She isn't trying to kill him with a blow. She swipes him, knocking his consciousness into the hub of the mental wheel. She plans to drag him down, and she pours every ounce of her fury into the attack. The hunter has become the hunted, but she still has fangs. Chapter 20. The illusion of the Wilmington apartment was a masterpiece of psychic cruelty. Dan Torrance woke not to the crisp air of the Colorado Rockies, but to the stale, suffocating atmosphere of his own past failures. The sunlight didn't just shine, it assaulted him, a visceral reminder of the hangover to end all hangovers. Beside him lay the manifestation of his deepest shame. Deanie, the one-night stand, the symbol of his descent. But this wasn't memory lane. It was a weapon. Rose the Hat had constructed a mental prison from the debris of Dan's own guilt, proving that the true knot doesn't just eat steam. They consume dignity. Yet the mind is a landscape Dan has traversed for decades. When the woman beside him grinned, revealing the singular rotted tooth of the true knot's leader, the illusion shattered. Rose's arrogance is her fatal flaw. She believes she is the predator, but she has stepped into a trap set by the prey. She demanded her medicine, pain and fear, but Dan was no longer the trembling alcoholic she expected. He was the lockbox. Rose, blinded by her hunger for Abra's immense power, didn't realize the switch had already occurred. She was choking Dan, or so she thought, relishing the kill. But the neck under her hands didn't belong to a broken man. It belonged to the steamhead man acting as a conduit for the girl. The psychological horror here shifts to physical brutality, as Rose realizes the mind she is crushing is red, angry, and impossibly strong. Chapter 21. The tables turned with violent abruptness. Rose found herself pinned by a force that wasn't just physical, it was the raw, telekinetic fury of Abra Stone. For the first time in centuries, the predator felt the cold grip of fear. She tried to assert dominance, to use her ancient psychic weight to crush the girl, but she had miscalculated the synergy between Dan and Abra. They weren't just two people. They were a circuit of shining power. The physical world, however, intervened with the subtlety of a sledgehammer. Billy Freeman, driving his pickup truck with the desperate courage of a mortal man protecting his own, slammed into the base of the lookout. The impact severed Rose's concentration. This is the beauty of the conflict. Ancient magic is undone by rusted steel and human bravery. Dan and Abra stood united on the psychic plane and the physical platform of the roof o' the world. Rose, now hatless and desperate, tried one last manipulation, attempting to seduce Abra with promises of immortality. It was a hollow pitch. Abra, possessing the terrifying moral clarity of a teenager, didn't want to live forever. She wanted justice. Together, uncle and niece unleashed a psychic shove, a gust of compressed air made of pure will. Rose the Hat, who had lived for millennia by feeding on the agony of children, was pushed backward. The railing snapped. Gravity, the ultimate equalizer, claimed her. She fell, her immortality shattering on the ground below. Chapter 22. The aftermath of violence often brings a strange quiet, and here it brought a necessary cleansing. Dan and Billy stood amidst the wreckage, survivors of a war few would ever know happened. The physical remains of the true knot were gone, cycled away into nothingness, leaving only clothes and the lingering stench of ancient corruption. But one totem remained, the hat. Dan burned it. The act was ceremonial, a final purging of the dark magic that had hunted them. As the silk and felt turned to ash, the air cleared. But the true closure came not from the fire, but from the platform above. Looking back at the ruins of the Overlook's legacy, Dan saw a figure, not a monster, not a drunk, but his father, Jack Torrance. The ghost offered a single gesture, a blown kiss. It was a redemption decades in the making. The cycle of abuse, the wheel of trauma that had crushed the Torrance family, was finally broken. Dan returned the kiss, weeping the tears of a son who has finally been allowed to forgive. Epilogue 1. 15 years is a lifetime for an alcoholic. The narrative jumps forward to an AA anniversary in New Hampshire, grounding the supernatural horror back into the mundane reality of recovery. Dan, now known as Doc, stood before his peers to collect his medallion. This scene is critical. It reveals that slaying vampires is easier than slaying one's own demons. Dan finally confessed his darkest secret, the moment he stole money from the real Deanie and abandoned her toddler to a table full of cocaine. This confession is the final step in his healing. He exposed his rot to the light, and instead of judgment, he found acceptance. The room didn't gasp. They understood. It's a profound commentary on the human condition. We are only as sick as our secrets, and in releasing them, Dan finally stepped out of the shadow of the Overlook entirely. Epilogue 2. Abra Stone at 15 was a volatile mix of hormones and godlike power. The story shifts to the domestic tension of the Stone household. Abra had broken her mother's antique plates, not with her hands, but with a burst of telekinetic temper after getting caught drinking. The parallels to Dan's youth are stark. The shining is a burden as much as a gift, and combined with a genetic predisposition for addiction, Abra walked a dangerous line. By the river, Dan offered her counsel, not as a superior, but as a fellow traveler on a jagged road. He warned her about the blood calling to blood. He didn't preach. He offered a practical outlet for her rage. Go to the dump. It's a moment of grim humor and wisdom. Instead of suppressing her power or letting it fester into the violence that consumed the true knot, she must channel it. He taught her that having a monster inside doesn't make you a monster, it just means you have to be a better jailer. Epilogue 3. The wheel turns a final time. Dan received a call from the hospice. Fred Carling, a man Dan didn't even like, a petty, selfish orderly, was dying after a car accident. This is the ultimate test of Dan's character. He didn't go because he wanted to. He went because he is the doctor sleep. His duty transcends personal feelings. In the quiet of the hospice room, with the ancient cat Azzy standing guard, Dan performed his final service. He took the fear away. He smoothed the transition from life to death, proving that his power, which was once a source of terror in the hallways of the Overlook, had been fully transmuted into an instrument of mercy. He held the dying man's hand, the shining flowing from him not as a weapon, but as a lullaby. "Until you sleep," he whispered. And in that silence, the story rests. Thank you for watching this episode of Horror Tales. We exist to dive deep into the lore of Stephen King novels and uncover the secrets hidden in the pages. If you enjoyed this video, please consider subscribing to the channel so you never miss a journey into the dark. Until next time, stay safe and keep reading.